Good morning and welcome to another episode here of Kimberley Stories on Warringate Radio 693 AM. Hope you've all had a wonderful week and winding up for a big weekend here in the East Kimberley. This morning we have a very, very exciting guest here in the studio with us. Somebody that I have had the wonderful opportunity of getting to know over the last couple of weeks, and he's quite well known around town. He is a senior social worker at the Kimberley Population Health Unit. He is a muso. He's a famous cook in town. He is Lawrence Emery. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Shankar, and welcome to you too. I was glad to be sharing the space, actually, because I could be calling you fellow countryman, actually, because you're just across the seas there.
That's right. And what Lawrence is referring to is, of course, that you're from...
I am from India, yes, originally. A lot of people get that a little bit confused when they first see me, because I get comments all over the place about, are you a blackfella or something? And I have to say, well, I am. I'm a blackfella from overseas because I've got a bit of Indian blood in me.
That's right.
And I know that you're from Sri Lanka, so, that's why I said fellow countryman. So, yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Terrific. We are going to have a subcontinental episode here on Warringate Radio 693. You're listening to Kimberley Stories. We're going to come back and find out a little bit about our friend Lawrence Emery here in the studio. So come back after this break. You're listening to Kimberley Stories. Welcome back to Kimberley Stories here on Warringate Radio 693 AM. We have in the studios this morning Lawrence Emery. For those of you who haven't met Lawrence, he is probably one of the most hospitable people I have ever met. I've enjoyed very much catching up with you, Lawrence, over the last couple of weeks. It's always involved a wonderful meal cooked by Mr. Emery in his home, and I haven't had curry for a long time, Lawrence. I have enjoyed your cooking very much.
Well, I do enjoy cooking for people, as you know, and I've done a few gigs around town, and I'm happy to do them. I'm happy to actually use my cooking skills to raise money for charities and stuff. So, yeah, it's a pleasure to cook for people, because I think one of the ways to get to the hearts of people is through their stomach.
Through their stomach, yeah, absolutely. They say that to win the heart of somebody is also, through a warm cooked meal. Lawrence, we're going to talk about food and cooking a bit later on in the show. Yep. But what I do want to bring to people's attention is that here in the studio at Warringate, I've now got all these different objects that Lawrence has actually come in with. There's photos, there's CDs, there's cooking ingredients, there are instruments, and I've basically allowed now for Lawrence to take over the show and take me through a journey of his life, and I'm just going to share each of these different objects that he's brought in with you, and we're going to go through a walk through the Lawrence Emery journey. So, Lawrence, I'm going to start with this photo here to my left, which is a black and white photo, and it has five people in it. There's a couple, I assume to be a couple, and three little children in the front. Yep. And they're very white looking.
Yes. My heritage is very much heritage that's similar to a lot of colonial countries, including Australia. My father's an Englishman whose own family left England in the 1850s and went to India. My mother's family have a much more complicated history and much further back than that with India, but of course includes elements of, the Irish, the Scots.
So this photo here, though, was taken where?
Yes, this photo was taken in a place called Shillong. It's one of my absolutely most favourite places in India. My younger brother Gordon was born there. I wasn't born there. And Shillong was a place that we lived in on 3 different occasions. Now, there's a long explanation for that, but the shortness of it is that my dad was in the Indian Army, and so we had to travel around all over. In fact, I'm really well travelled around India, and I've lived in many, many places because of my dad's stay in short stays in military cantonments around India.
Where exactly is Shillong in India for people who don't know
Shillong
where it is?
If people know the map of the world and they know where the Bay of Bengal is, Burma to the right as you're going up the Bay of Bengal towards Bangladesh, and India to your left. And as you hit the Ganges Delta, which is essentially Bangladesh, you keep going across the land towards the Himalayas. And on your right, a most famous river flows through a state called Assam, called the Brahmaputra, which is an amazing river. And that also joins the Ganges. And most of the hill stations around to the right of that in the northeast of India that merge into the mountains of Burma and then into Thailand, and of course all the way up through the Central Highlands into Vietnam. So Shillong is sort of in a state in the northeast of India, and a town. It's the most beautiful place. A local tribe called the Khasi hill tribes live there. And I went to a Catholic school in Shillong called St. Edmund's, and that was a very positive and wonderful experience. My schooling in Shillong was, something that sticks out in memory as a very positive experience.
Now, I'm looking at these photos. There's smaller photos contained within this larger photo here, and there's pictures of cars and motorbikes and all sorts of. You got very Western clothing, and I guess I'm drawing attention to that because you've described your childhood as being somewhat sheltered.
Yes,
and insulated from the, thriving dynamic culture of India, which is
when you get to nearly 60 years of age, you have a lot of time to also reflect on your childhood. And one of the things that I loved the experience of my childhood in India because it exposed me to the incredible richness of Indian cultural life. But I was also shielded from it, and that's why I made that comment, because, as you say from the photos, it looks white, Anglo-Saxon, not much Indian in it, but that was fairly typical of the times. And because my father was in the army, we lived in confined military cantonments. These are areas in which army people, army personnel sort of gather and live together. So you're kind of almost in a walled compound of an area, and you still have interaction with the wider community, but not as much as you possibly would if you lived right out there amongst them.
You were in India till you were 14 years old.
Yes, that's right. I, in fact, left India from Bombay, and there's a place there called India Gate, a famous place where a lot of young travellers, if they've been to Bombay, they've gone to backpacker joints just up the road from India Gate. And that was all quite confusing, actually, because as a 14-year-old boy, I wasn't quite mentally prepared to leave India. I didn't want to leave India because I was leaving a lot of things behind. And so we left through India Gate in a P&O liner called Chusan, which was quite a well-known P&O liner, and it was, in those days there were a lot of boats coming from England and bringing migrants to Australia.
So you were one of those original boat people.
Yes. I often say that myself, actually, that I'm a boat person.
You got through.
I got through, yeah, that's right.
They didn't stop you at Christmas Island.
No, and they didn't send me to Nauru either, which I'm eternally grateful
and we are all grateful for you being here. Lawrence, we're going to come back after a very quick song to talk a bit more about your arrival in Australia and your, I guess, emergence in this wonderful land that we call home. Welcome back to Kimberley Stories, Warringah Radio 693 AM. You are joining Shankar, myself, and Lawrence Emery, and a studio full of objects, pictures, and a whole bunch of things which say a lot about the very, very diverse, interesting journey of my guest this morning. Lawrence, we talked a bit about your family, and we talked a bit about your roots in India just before. And now I'm just looking at this scarf here, this fairly hideous-looking Frio scarf, Fremantle Dockers scarf, and Yeah. Now, how did you go about, making that very poor judgment to join the Fremantle?
Well, I thought it was a very good judgment myself, actually, because here we are. We're long-suffering Freo fans, of course, but I'll get to the issue of how I got there. Because, before I get there, of course, I'm one of the elated Freo supporters. Our team was able to make it to the grand final, and what an exciting moment for us, because we have been long-suffering fans. My interest in Freo came about when I moved. After 1 year living in Victoria Park in Perth, to a suburb called
Kwinana, which
Medina,
is
Kwinana.
Very interesting high school in Kwinana.
Yes, that's right. I think at the time it had a reputation for being one of the second roughest school in the state, after Balga.
So just to bring people up to speed, this is Lawrence Emery, who has spent the first 14 years of his life in India, has gone on a big boat and has come and arrived in Australia just after the abolition of the White Australia policy.
Well, that's true, yes.
And you've just turned up and you're going to Kwinana High School.
Yes, and the interesting thing about Kwinana High School, of course, is that it didn't it had lots of Australians, but it also had lots of Poms. And then, if I use the word Poms, someone will say, "Oh, well, you're not allowed to say that." But of course, everyone knows what I'm referring to. But a lot of English students as well. And because of my heritage with India, it was very easy to actually mix with the English migrants, because I was somewhat more accepted by them. It was a little bit tougher with the Aussies, but of course that's changed heaps. And as a migrant child, when you come to this country, you look for anything that you could possibly do to assimilate, if you like, or integrate is probably a better word, into the majority society. So of course football
one of those
is one,
things?
and of course sport is the other, because then I played a lot of sport and I excelled in some of them. So it was an opportunity as a male, I guess, to demonstrate that, I had the medal and I could do it.
Certainly that's the story for a lot of migrant kids today, Lawrence, is that, especially a lot of Sudanese or, is that when they come to school, one of the things that they can connect with is sport. And certainly we...
And of course, Aboriginal people here who can be seriously disadvantaged in many, many ways, and have been so for a long time in this country, their great leveller and way to establish themselves is often through sport as well. So to get back to Fremantle, so when I moved from there to Kwinana, of course Kwinana is south of Fremantle, and of course if you were going to go to any football games, you had to go to either East Fremantle or South Fremantle, really. Otherwise you had to go to north of the suburb to all those northern teams that became the sort of bastions of the West Coast Eagles, I guess. And it was quite painful for someone like me. I was a passionate South Fremantle supporter, and I used to go and watch football in the days when, Maurice Rioli played for South Fremantle and the great Stephen Michael. I just remember being fascinated just going down to the Oval to see Stephen Michael play. Now that guy was an Indigenous footballer who would have easily have won, the major sporting medals that were around if the AFL were alive at his time. And it was just fantastic to see him play. So my passion for Aussie rules and supporting Freo came through supporting South Fremantle. And my wife, of course, Sonia, is a East Fremantle supporter.
Big shout out to Sonia. I'm sure who's listening in at the moment.
Well, she possibly is. Yeah, the granddaughter might be listening in too, little Mahala. So hello to Mahala and Sonia.
What a lovely name.
Yes, well, it comes from your country, doesn't it?
Sri Lankan. Yeah. Sri Lankan cricket captain is Mahala. Kwinana, if I just want to go back to there for just a second, what was that like? I mean, you said it was a very rough school growing up, and, how did you feel that propelled you forward in terms of your academic pursuits and engagement?
Kwinana's a really interesting place, and there's a place in my heart, even though I don't live there anymore, that that has Kwinana sort of etched into it, because we did so many great things, when we were young adults. And getting our licenses and driving cars for the first time on motorcycles, we had the beaches of the southern suburbs, Rockingham and the beaches at Golden Bay and Mandurah, and so we used to spend a lot of time in the bush and on the beaches there. So it was a very, very pleasant time. But from a social perspective, like in terms of interacting with people, it was a bit tough, and it had been tough for a number of years when I first got here, because I wasn't your average white Aussie kid. I had a different way of speaking, and I was treated differently. So, and like you had mentioned before, it hadn't been too long that Australia had got rid of the White Australia policy, and that policy was very much based on race. And
so it was pretty challenging for somebody who's still obviously very young in their journey in life, and at the same time there are people looking at you and forming identities of who you are and how you fit or don't fit. You were, in that way, pretty much stuck between two worlds, weren't you?
Oh yes, absolutely. And what helps you, I guess, traverse the two worlds, of course, is things like sport, which is what we're talking about now. The friendships that you make with, people who decide that they don't want to victimize you or treat you in a racist manner. So you develop your friendships with people who don't look at race or don't look at color. You can do it through music. You can do it through a whole range of activities. So when you try and do the integration stuff as a young migrant kid, what you do, and I'm sure that my Indigenous brothers and sisters out there who are also thinking about these issues are confronted by the same issues, that they look for any mechanism in which they could start to feel socially included and to be cohesive within a society. So one of the things that's because of those personal experiences I feel experienced as a child, I definitely went to this whole area of work that I've been sort of moving towards.
We're going to talk a lot about, a few things that you mentioned there: music, friendships, and the work that you're doing later. But we are going to go away quickly to a break. You're listening to Lawrence Emery on Kimberley Stories. And, come back after this break. Welcome back to Kimberley Stories, Warrango Radio 693 AM. We have in the studio Lawrence Emery and a whole bunch of Lawrence's artefacts from his very young life. To my right is a photo that Lawrence has brought into the studio of a elderly gentleman. It's a black and white photo. He's very somber looking. He's not smiling at all. Who am I looking at, Lawrence?
You're looking at a man called Dilawar Khan, and he's a Muslim man. And that photo was taken when he was about 76 years of age, and it would have been taken approximately 3 months before we boarded the boat to come to Australia in 1968. So he was a man that became a servant in my grandparents' family in India. Servant meaning, someone working for menial wages and doing chores around the house.
Yeah.
And he was our cook. So he raised my father as a child and his siblings, and he raised me as a child. So he raised two generations of the Emery children, and so devoted his entire life
to your family,
to us. Yes, yeah. So his name was Dilawar Khan.
He has played a pretty important part in your life, hasn't he?
Big, very, very much so. I still get quite emotional when I talk about him, but I've learnt to deal with that. And like our Aboriginal community here, who place a lot of emphasis on the elderly and the knowledge and wisdom that they might present. This guy had that kind of impact on me, and I feel eternally grateful that I had his influence, because when I come across, tough times or times in which I sort of need to reach out in my own head for some kind of emotional support and and strength, I can appeal to him, and the memory, the sort of impact that he's left in my brain about how to face life, and how to cope with difficulty.
He was, after all, when you were growing up, you've talked about this before, you had a fairly privileged childhood and youth, and he was just somebody who was coming from another world, really, outside those walls of your home, basically, and he was able to give you an insight, wasn't he, into a lot of the challenges facing communities in India around disadvantage and poverty.
Yes, well, look, India's a paradox of all sorts of things, rich textures of life, beautiful music, vibrant cultures all over the place, and then you can go in the streets of Calcutta and see people dying on the pavement. You can have fairly privileged people like us who were guaranteed and ensured a good life with good accommodation, and living alongside an old man like this who worked for virtually nothing, for pocket money, which is what it was, I suspect. I wasn't an adult at the time in India, so I couldn't make much sense of it, but as an adult here in Australia, when I look back on it, but a lot of grace, There's a wonderful book that's written about a story, and of those people who are interested in reading books, I could recommend a wonderful book called The Death of Vishnu. And it's a story about a simple man in India who lives on a pavement surrounded by apartments, and this guy gets old and he gets ill and he's dying, and all of life, of course, proceeds around him. And the story is about the dignity of this man and how he lays huddled under his blanket on this little part of the pavement somewhere, and life just goes on around him until eventually he lapses into unconsciousness and then eventually dies, and then people notice that he hasn't moved, so it's quite for me that book really explains the paradoxes of India. But of course there are some interesting parallels, of course, with Australia here.
Khan is very much alive, though, in your life. I mean, if you walk into the Emery household here in Kununurra and you go into the kitchen, his photo is very prominently placed in the kitchen, and he's certainly very prominently placed in your life. When you talk about your work here, what are you doing here in Kununurra?
Well, what am I doing here is what I've been doing, I think, for the last 30-odd years. I think what Dilawar Khan instilled in me as a child was a compassionate philosophy, a philosophy of caring for people who are disadvantaged, who are poor, and who don't have access to means to living, and that it's the job of people of privilege and of learning to actually dedicate themselves to fixing some of those problems up. So
you were in Halls Creek for 5 years, working with the Land Council?
Yes, that's right. Halls Creek was a wonderful time for me. I feel like Halls Creek is one of my homes. It's a great privilege to go back to Halls Creek and to spend time there every time I go, because I know virtually the whole community there. And I worked for the Kimberley Land Council, and I know a lot of people around here that I know me from those days, and I value all those friendships that I've made with people along the way. The job was a very important job because it was a job in a similar vein, but it was at the cutting edge. It had to do with native title preparatory work. It had to do with negotiation work and project management work, and that was really important because the foundation blocks for Aboriginal people to be able to negotiate with mining companies, with developers, can only come about by the establishment of their native title interests, where they can argue very forcefully that they've established their connection to a piece of country, that they've been recognised by a court in relation to that connection, and from now on, if anyone wants to develop on those lands, then they have an obligation to actually negotiate with Aboriginal people. So you can see that in a similar vein to social work and some of the other jobs that I've done in my life, native title work, in my mind at least anyway, is very, very similar.
And you have been a social worker now for the last 2 years here in East Kimberley, working with the Kimberley Population Health Unit.
Yes, that's right. It's a coming back to social work. I left social work in 1997 to take up my job with the Kimberley Land Council in Halls Creek, and I worked there for 5 years, and then I went back down south to Albany to start up a catering business, and then...
That's right. You took a break. You took a break from the very intense, grueling work that social work can be, and you picked up curry powders and things. I'm saying curry powder because I'm staring here at another little item that Lawrence has brought in, and I've got in my hand now this Shan Kofta curry mix for meatballs and spicy curry, premium quality, 50 grams. So you did become a caterer, and what was that business called?
That business was actually called Khan's Kitchen.
Named after...
Well, logically for me, anyway. I played around quite a while with the idea of what am I going to call the business, and then, of course, there was something unconscious in the back of my brain just calling out and saying, and one of my neighbours, we were playing around with names, and we just went, Khan's Kitchen. Dilawar Khan's Kitchen. That's what it is. I spent all my childhood in his kitchen, and here I am starting out a catering business. It's got to be Khan's Kitchen. So that's how it came to be called Khan's Kitchen. And of course, the spice you have in front of you there, kofta curry, is very much a northern Indian dish.
Yeah.
Because it involves meat, of course, because the southerners are vegetarian mostly, and old Dilawar Khan there, whose picture's up in front of us, he was a Muslim man, and it was his tribes, or his mob basically, who made the north of India eat lots of meat dishes, of course, because otherwise they too would have remained vegetarian, I suspect.
Yeah. I'm sure all our listeners are just salivating at their lips with thoughts of wonderful, warm, cooked Khan kitchen cuisine. We're going to go to a break and come back with Lawrence Emery here on Kimberley Stories, Warringah Radio 693. Do join us after this. Welcome back to Kimberley Stories, Warringah Radio 693 AM. You are listening to Heart, These Dreams. I do apologise to my listeners. I didn't get a chance to pre-select my songs this week. So many apologies for that. But we have an exciting guest this week, though, Lawrence Emery, to make up for it. We're having a chat to Lawrence, and we've got all these wonderful artifacts from your history, Lawrence, and photos and things. I've got a photo in my hand of young Lawrence, who's a social worker here in the Kimberley, and Lawrence standing next to a gentleman with a big smile. Who am I looking at, Lawrence?
You're looking at a very good friend of mine called Charlie Leman. Now, Charlie Leman's a very interesting person. I wish I'd met the Leman family when I came to Australia in 1968. They're an amazing family that lived in Cottesloe. And Charlie's mother was a piano teacher, and a father who travelled the South Pacific on a boat, working for the Australian government. And Charlie lives in Albany, and he's become a really good friend. His whole family is a bunch of musicians, and it's been wonderful because I have a long tradition of music and influence of music in India. And coming to Australia and meeting Charlie and his family with their music interests has been a wonderful experience.
Just on this table here, speaking about musical interests, I've got a bunch of CDs that Lawrence also brought in, and I've got... On one hand, I've got Krishna bhajans and Indian classical music.
Yes.
And then on the other hand, I've got Paul Kelly.
Yes.
So that says a lot about my guests' very diverse music interests. You do have a love for, your roots in Indian traditional music, don't you?
I have a vast collection of Indian music because I remember as a boy, as a 14-year-old, when I was leaving that country, one of my thoughts when, just as I was a few days before we were about to board the boat, was would I ever actually hear Indian music again? I had that childlike concept that once I'd left India, that would be it. And I also remember thinking, would I ever eat a curry or taste Indian food? And look what's happened. I've ended up running a catering business. So,
and of course, what would I discover? And you discover the great Paul Kelly and other Australian musicians too.
Yeah, well, the great thing about music, of course, is that it's universal, and I really do value my childhood experiences of being exposed to music. We used to go to Catholic clubs on a Sunday and do lots of singing on stage.
Catholic clubs, did you say?
Catholic clubs on a Sunday after
clubs.
church in India. Yes, I grew up a Catholic.
Yeah,
and
was it
the musical
did it go off
India
at the Catholic music clubs?
And of course, if you've ever travelled in India, you know that the one thing that you hear all the time, apart from the traffic and the blowing of the horns and the trucks and buses, is music. Music just blares everywhere in India. It's everywhere you go, and it's a wonderful thing. So it's infused me and my enthusiasm for singing and music. Yes, so the diversity is good. I appreciate world music. I have a vast collection of music from all around the world.
You've got an instrument right to your left there.
Yes,
Lawrence.
I do, yes.
It is a ukulele.
Yep.
Tell us about the Kununurra Ukulele Society.
Well, we're always looking for something to do, of course, and I brought myself a guitar when I came up here, and I just bash and plug away on chords on the guitar, primarily because I like to sing. And I found that there were 2 or 3 other people in town who had an interest in ukuleles, so we just and there's this big emerging interest in ukuleles around the world. And so we, 3 or 4 of us, got together and decided we'd all buy ukuleles and start bashing away and see what we could do. So we affectionately called ourselves the Kununurra Ukulele, the little-known Kununurra Ukulele Society, as it appeared in the paper. And at one stage we had up to 8 members, which was fantastic.
It's an orchestra.
And the Echo actually produced a little story a few months ago on our group, and there was a lovely picture of us.
I'm going to ask you to pull it out for us there and give us a song, Lawrence. Our listeners are very, very keen ukulele listeners, and they've been waiting all morning for this. So, what are you going to offer us?
Okay, this is a song that I'm going to dedicate to my grandchildren, 2 of whom are currently holidaying in Thailand, but I've got one here, little Mihaela, and I love singing this song because I think this song is about making you happy, and I like it because I remember my dad, who was quite into music, actually enjoyed playing the music of Burl Ives and Bing Crosby. And so it's a song that comes from Hawaii, which is quintessentially associated with the ukulele, I guess. And I'll give a bash anyway. So it's called Pearly Shells. Pearly shells from the ocean, shining in the sun, covering the shore. When I see them, my heart tells me that I love you more than all those little pearly shells. For every grain of sand upon the beach, I've got a kiss for you, and I've got more left over for every star that twinkles in the blue. Pearly shells from the ocean, shining in the sun, covering the shore. When I see them, my heart tells me that I love you more than all those little pearly shells. More than all those little pearly shells.
That was Lawrence Emery live only here on Warringah Radio 693 AM playing Pearly Shells. His album will be coming out shortly. But for now, we are going to take a break and come back to Kimberley Stories here on 693. You're listening to Kimberley Stories on Warringah Radio 693 AM. We have in the studio Lawrence Emery, who I've just been informed, besides being a social worker, an amazing ukulele player, grandfather, father, husband. He also happens to have been the head chef at Hotel Kununurra.
Yes, that was. I was just explaining to you that when my daughter and son-in-law were living here, they've been here for 5 years. About 3 or 4 years ago, we visited them, and they were working at the Kununurra Hotel, and so in exchange for some free accommodation, I was the guest chef there for the night, and they had an Indian night, and I think they had about 120 people turn up. So it was a good deal for us. We got some free accommodation, and they got the money out of it.
Yeah. And Lawrence, I've just got a gut feeling that you and I are going to be great friends, and
Yes.
I'm going to be enjoying, coming and checking up on you in your house around 7 o'clock every night. Lawrence, you've been pretty active here in this community as a social worker. You've been, as you've explained during the last hour, pretty actively involved in a diversity of different issues, from working at the Land Council and being a social worker. What motivates you? What keeps you going? Well, look,
one of the great, to call it a shame, yes, I think it is a shame. One of the shames of Australia really is the incredible disparity and the exclusion, the lack of integration, if you like, between Indigenous culture and the majority white population. That's what I call it. There's no point in hiding around it. That's motivated me from the day I came. When I arrived from India, I came from, as I've explained, this vast and rich cultural experience. And my experience in this country in 1968 of where Aboriginal people fitted into the scheme of things was, I only saw them on park benches in East Perth, and people will know what I'm talking about when I describe that. With a brown paper bag in a bottle, and they were hidden from view. They were not part of society, and I couldn't make very much sense of it at all. And of course, as I grew up and got older and did social work at university and stuff, I began to understand the political context and the social context in how that happens or has happened. And so I take great pride in being part of a cultural education process. I don't pretend to be Aboriginal, but in terms of promoting the real history of what happened to Aboriginal people in this country, including what happened to them in the East Kimberley. There are several myths and untruths, which I don't have time to get into right now about all of that in relation to the East Kimberley, which need to be corrected. There are historical myths that are perpetuated around here about all of that. But of course, more importantly, within the health context, the single most striking figure that strikes me of importance is that Aboriginal people are 45% of our population in the Kimberley, and in some of our towns, like in Halls Creek and Fitzroy Crossing, they're above 90% of the population. But when you look at how much of the workforce they are and how they participate in the economy of these towns, you soon start to see amazing disparities. And of course, old Delawa, I can credit him with getting me to think about and to challenge, at a very early childhood, some of those perceptions.
And how do you feel that you're doing some of that work?
Well, you have to chip away, because you cannot just confront people, about these inequalities. You have to actually learn to work with people about them, and you have to get people on side, people in positions of power, people in positions of influence. And so in my job, I essentially try and focus on Indigenous employment issues. and supporting the existing Indigenous workforce in terms of higher educational achievements, so that they can actually go on to become the managers and the team leaders and the professional people who are running services. Because let's face it, the future of health, welfare, justice, all those major issues that impact on Indigenous people in this town, is that more of their people work in that area to actually get to that point where they do self-care, like they're actually addressing the issues for themselves.
And have you seen signs of positive growth and change in the time that you've been here?
Yes, I think, as always, I have a lot of impatience for that sort of stuff, and I can get fairly passionate and riled up about it, but there are gradual improvements that are occurring across the board. We see the emergence of a number of Indigenous corporations who are now starting to spread their wings in terms of, social welfare, health programs, and I think that that's a good thing. The area that's still of great concern and needs a lot more attention, of course, is governance structures and accountability structures, and so there are great challenges still ahead there.
So what Lawrence is really, you're saying, is that you're here for a while. You're going to stick around.
Well, it's not going to go away. I think that these are generational issues. The challenges are there. I thought, in fact, that I'm not much of a political supporter of the new Conservative government, as people would well know, because I've been out handing out greens out of our cup.
Do you still see a long career ahead of you?
Do you
still see a long career ahead of you?
Well, you see, my view of life is that...
You've been actively... Sorry.
Yes, that's right.
You've been actively involved in social work for the last 30 years.
Yes.
Is there still more petrol in that tank, is I guess what I'm asking?
Oh, of course there is, because my view of the world is that it's a bit like living and working. I don't actually see the work that I do very separate from my personal life and my family life and what I do with with all of my friends. I tend to integrate all of those things, so I don't know that for me work stops when I retire.
Fantastic. I have a couple of elderly parents at home listening right now who are exactly in the same boat. I'm sure many of us are familiar with our parents who just refuse to sit back and relax and need to keep working. I'd like to get you working on that ukulele as we finish this hour, Lawrence. There is a song that I'd like you to play as we wrap up Kimberley Stories for this week. We've got an exciting guest next week, same time, same place, with Neil Paik, resident poet in Kununurra, who is going to talk to us about his work. But yeah, we've had the absolute pleasure of listening to Lawrence Emery here this hour, share his experiences of being a migrant and being a social worker, a cook, a muso. And he's going to finish now with a special request for me. And what's that song that you're about to play for us, Lawrence?
Yes, look, this is Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and a lot of ukulele groups are playing this song, and it's a song that was written by a famous Hawaiian musician called Israel Kamaka Wiwo Ole, and unfortunately he died a few years ago. And when I was in Hawaii visiting some friends a while back, I asked them about Hawaiian musicians, and they said, you have to learn to sing the songs of Israel. And so anyway, I'll give this a bash, and I hope I do it some justice.
It's called
Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, and the dreams that you dream of, oh, once in a lullaby. Oh, somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly, And the dreams that you dream of, dreams really do come true. Ooh, someday I'll wish upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops, high above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow. Bluebirds fly, and the dreams that you dare to, oh why can't well, I see trees of green, red roses too. I watch them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Well, I see skies of blue, and I see clouds of white, and the brightness of day, and I like the dark, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Oh, the colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of the people passing by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. Well, I hear babies cry, and I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
You've been listening to Kimberley Stories with Shanker and Lawrence Emery on Warringah Radio 693 AM.